Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we're looking at the big picture as we head into yet another EU summit on Greece. Is it all worth it, we're asking. And with us to talk about it, we're joined, part two of our discussion, by Leonidas Kaligeropoulos of the Small Business Leaders Association, Ethic. Tell us about Ethic.
Well, Ethic is a movement of entrepreneurs. And we do believe that economy is, first of all, a story of entrepreneur. And that's what makes wealth of nations, and not debts, Europe, state, subsidiaries. So we are very much based on what is at the beginning of big companies. It's first of all small companies, it is people. And in Ethic, you've got first the name humain, which is the engagement of people together, making the economics work. And that's what we're obsessed by. And that's perhaps an interesting view on what's happening in Greece.
All right. And we have more than just one entrepreneur with us. We have also as well Jakob Hessler, who works on big data and also
healthcare and in finance, actually.
All right, with your startup company here in France. With us as well, Philip Galeb, who teaches international affairs at the American University of Paris. And from London, Raoul Ruparel, co-director of Open Europe. Welcome back to the show, sir. Just want to show everyone, Germany's best-selling newspaper put out an editorial this Monday entitled, "This is why it builds in favor of a Grexit. Another deal with Greece would not solve the problem. It will just postpone it for a few months," writes the tabloid, adding, "The decisive point is that Greece is not solvent without Germany's billions." And we have a comment on Twitter on that. "Face it, a Grexit is the only option. The euro is over." Jakob Hessler, this movement to kick out the Greeks is growing steam in your native Germany.
Yes, I think it's a big error. I think the Germans should be very well aware and look to Switzerland. Not forget that with every country that leaves the euro perceived to be softer in currency, this will inevitably make the euro appreciate. And you could say in certain ways Germany has been riding a much lower euro than its own currency would have been ever since its creation. And let's not forget, 60% of German exports go to the EU, and a 20% rise of the euro compared to like the Swiss franc before. Go and ask any Swiss retailers or Swiss restaurants in any border town, and even not so border town, what's happening to them. They had to revise growth figures down. Switzerland will only have not even 1.1% growth for 2015 because of that. And it was inevitable. So I'm not saying the Swiss, they had no choice. But if we want to preserve that choice, we better keep the euro. The Germans are the first to have an interest in it being maintained if they're being reasonable, which, given the sort of fantasies and conceptions about inflation and money, which the Germans nurture for a long time, is always a complicated thing.
But those you call them fantasies, but they're really gaining steam, not just within...
No one ever said that fantasies are not powerful.
No, but not just within Eurosceptics. There are a lot of people within Angela Merkel's own party who've said enough of the Greeks, you know?
Yeah, the point is that I think that once you start, you open up a can of worms. It's a Pandora's box, and as with Pandora's box, it shouldn't. I think it should be closed.
I'm sorry, but I don't know what the Pandora's box is, because if one accepts it for Greek, and after all, why not? I mean, you could say our rules are not very serious rules. They were just there, I don't know, to make something, to make a show, and we don't think it's important. We should have our rules being respected. Where does it stop? Why should it stop to Greece? Why not to all the other countries? Why all the other countries which did do the efforts to go back into the rules should respect them? Or why shouldn't they come and say now, well, we want the same kind of treatment as the Greeks? And where does it stop? So you say if we leave Greece alone and there's a Grexit, that's a bit of a catastrophe for Europe. That's what your thesis is. But don't you think one could have exactly the opposite thesis, saying that if we do accept this 10th, 12th, 15th, I don't know, ultimate summit to save Greece, and we finally save Greece once again, till the next time.
But are we saving it once again? Has there been a sizable haircut for the Greeks?
I'm sorry, because I really don't know in which way we're supposed to be saving Greece. I don't know what it is saving, in which way one can consider it as being saved, whereas every 3 or 6 months there's a new summit. So I do understand that one can say, once and for all, rules are the rules. Everybody's got to respect them. If our rules are not feasible for Greece, well,
But
then
if the
there
rules
must be
are
a
totally,
Brexit.
if the rules are totally irrational, if the economic facts on the ground have demonstrated that the rules don't work, if the economic policies have proven that they are bankrupt, it's not only that states are bankrupt, but that the economic policies, the thinking, the entire management of the crisis is itself bankrupt. If there's also a moral bankruptcy behind it, because the assumption is that rules are more important than the lives of people, I think there's a certain kind of moral bankruptcy in that kind of thinking. The reality of the matter is that there are many very, very serious minds, all right? Nobel Prize winners, Amartya Sen, Stiglitz, Krugman, others among them, hundreds and thousands of economists and specialists who agree with Mr. Hessler's assessment that if once you begin the process of deconstruction, the European system is going to begin to fall apart.
Let me ask Raoul Ruparel about this, because this has been bantied about a lot in the last couple of weeks. Will a Greek exit, a grexit, mean the beginning of the end for the euro?
Well, I think you're looking at it as a stable environment, and it's not. I think there would have to be some response from the rest of Europe. To just say Grexit happens and that unravels Europe, I don't think that's necessarily correct. I mean, it would be a huge blow to Europe and the politics and the integration, but to assume that they would do nothing in response is also probably not true. To respond to it, the Eurozone would have to take action to change its institutions, to change its architecture, and try and offset the hit of Grexit. And I think it's ironic that Krugman was cited there, because he's actually been in favour or calling for Grexit for quite some time and actually predicted it back in 2012. So I think that's a bit strange. But in any case, I think to view it as inherently bad in the unravelling of Europe, I don't think that's true, because Europe would have to take some response to it. Now, if Europe found itself unable to respond and couldn't agree on some kind of political response, then certainly I think it could begin to see the end of the euro. But that would just be an indictment of the euro itself, because it would show they would be unable to take any political action or any economic action in the face of a serious crisis. And then if that's the case, what's the point in the euro existing anyway? So I think it's likely that Grexit would certainly be bad and a blow to the Eurozone, but in the end, they would take action to offset it and move forwards. So to view it as an event in a static equilibrium is not necessarily the case, I think.
All right, we're seeing, by the way, images from the outside of the Greek parliament, a huge rally in favor of staying inside of the Eurozone.
I mean, there's a paradox saying we want to stay, but we don't want the rules. We want the money of Europe, but nevertheless, we consider Europe is the cause of our situation. I mean, I do find there's something a bit astonishing in.
But there are two manifestations. They're the ones protesting against austerity, and there are the others who are for actually accepting a deal with Europe. I think that's the whole thing, and that's unravels the whole tragedy of the whole situation, in my view, and that's why, in some sense, I think also there's the moral requirement of not letting this go down the drain. Yes, this party has been elected democratically, but in a way, it hasn't been elected. It doesn't represent the entire will of the Greek people to run this into the wall. And I think Europe, if it wants to maintain some type of moral credibility with the Greeks, actually, and it should honor the fact that there are serious people in there who want to stay. And so Europe should try to fix it. And I think, to just one more point about the rules are the rules, I think that is a unpolitical view of what the rules are, because the rules are always the rules, but that basically means the rules are never the ruls.
Yes, okay, but
so the way the rules are made, if you know how the Maastricht Treaty rules, the 2% they were made.
If I may say, the rules are not the rules, and we've already made the demonstration that the rules are not the rules.
Yes.
For now, many years, many summits.
Have we fared so bad?
Extent? So, and the fact is that the precedent government, which lost the elections, was on the good way on the good track.
Well, see that I'm not. See, I'm not in favor of. I'm not. Nobody would ever accuse me of having too much sympathy for very left-leaning governments. But I have to say, I don't agree with you that the previous governments took any earnest steps to really fix the problem. That's exactly why we got there. Because we had politics of the socialists and the right wing. It was all the same sauce. They didn't solve it.
You have to say, even though we don't agree on the politics in Greece, which is fine by me. That's part of democratic debate, after all. If you look at this, in 2010, Greece's debt to GDP ratio when the crisis began was 107% of GDP. It was manageable, and actually the Greek debt problem could have been solved then and there with appropriate and careful and thought through policies that did not involve the wrenching depression that was imposed on Greece. Today, the debt to GDP ratio is closer to 180%. So that in itself is testimony to a complete failure of policy. You see, so to ask people to abide by rules when those rules themselves are fundamentally flawed, and when the powers that the rule makers. When the rule makers themselves violate the rules, I mean, Germany violated the Maastricht Treaty criteria under Schröder. France has done so repeatedly. The Italians have done so repeatedly. It is not true that the inflexibility of the system is such that you cannot arrive at some kind of reasonable solution.
If I may, that's exactly the reason why I get to the conclusion that it's got to stop sometime, because otherwise,
killing the Greeks.
Otherwise, you've got the conclusion that there are no rules at all anymore.
Well,
that's exactly what you're saying.
There's no good system of rules.
Okay, but therefore, well, I mean, you can have an anarchy ideal, which I can.
No, I don't have that at all.
Well,
not at all. I believe in rules-based orders when they actually serve the common interest. The Eurozone is a flawed construction.
I've got very big difficulty understanding that when you've got 240 billion of loan, because
they're not actually loans.
Well, let's say
it's money that's recycled in the system.
I mean, that's come on.
It is.
Anyhow, when you've got people accusing the ones who have loaned 240 billion to be the guilty ones for the situation in which you are, after a while, isn't it necessary people should say, well, we're going to take our own life in hand and deal with it?
Yes, I'm not talking about guilt. I'm not talking about guilt. In German, there's this curious association between guilt and debt. Schuld means guilt, and it also means debt. That's a curious thing, you see. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that there's a manifest failure of policy, all right? If the policies had been successful, we would have known that they were successful, all right?
All right, there one reaction on Twitter saying the probabilities are Greece will prosper more outside of the euro. Raul Ruparel, do you agree?
It's possible that there are conditions under which they could prosper outside. The question is whether the current government is the one to enact it, or whether any government in Greece can actually enact it, because it would mean undertaking some serious reforms, opening the economy up, becoming more liberal, becoming free trading, and enacting many of the reforms that we're talking about now to improve the business climate. They would have the addition of a devalued currency to allow them to boost their exports, to buy them more time, and to buy a bit of time to enact such strict reforms that they haven't had inside the Eurozone. But we also shouldn't forget there would be huge initial disruption, and managing that, I mean, we heard from the Bank of Greece earlier this week that they believe that if you did have an exit, there's a risk of hyperinflation and those kinds of scenarios. I think that's a bit overblown, but certainly it's something that has to be considered. And I think what's really the case is about the policy choices outside the Eurozone, and are those any easier to take than inside the Eurozone? And certainly you would have the benefit of a devaluation, but I'm not sure that the case of Greece would be much easier outside. It still has to enact some reforms and still has to be more competitive. And so I think the government would eventually face many of the same choices.
All right, we were talking earlier, and Jakob Hessler raised the prospect of a Swiss scenario where when nations exit the Eurozone, suddenly it's going to become a lot more expensive to export stuff. We can show you a few graphs about that. In the 16 years since the euro was launched, the common currency has been better to some than to others. We could show you, first of all, how Germany has done remarkably well. If you look at the trade balance, Germany's that blue line. Everybody else is down there near zero. The French, by the way, below the zero mark. But anyway, and also you could see that it's fueled Germany's trade not just with the Eurozone, by the way, but also with the rest of the world. The rest of the world is the graph you see in yellow. And the EU is, which is in positive territory, by the way, but it's the part that's in blue. What commentary have you when you look at that graph, Jakob Hessler?
Well, when I look at that, my comment is to say, look what the Greeks did spend all that money on. Look at when the Greek crisis started. What was the first thing the Germans wanted to secure? It was to secure the order for I don't know how many tanks from Klaus Maffei for a mainly mountainous state against the evil Turks. It was to maintain and pay the orders of I don't know how many submarines constructed by Howaldtswerke. It was the fact that Hochtief built the Athens airport, that Siemens built the super new marble great Athens subway. In a way, the Germans are waking up and realizing that, in fact, what this was some export subsidy. That's how maybe it's slightly not economically orthodox correct, but ultimately that's what this was. They poured in money and let people do things that they probably shouldn't have done. And yes, they shouldn't have done it. And I think it's a bad policy to have let the Greeks do that. But they profited from it. And in a way, the bill comes now, and we need to be slightly more pragmatic about how we share the burden of when the bill comes.
But we're seeing this lead editorial that we talked about in the largest selling newspaper in the country, in Bild and everything. The Chancellor on that score, why isn't she making the argument that you're making here?
Because, as I say again, I think because the Germans have a very unhealthy relation to the question of inflation and of the money. The notion of macroeconomic management is, to say the least, very, very tainted in Germany. And I think modern economics, even you couldn't accuse people like Larry Summers of being particularly left-wing. These people are doing or proposing something called macroeconomic management, which involves to consider that the monetary mass and monetary policy is one variable you can use in steering an economy through a downturn. And refusing that and believing, and that's where your Schuld thing is, there is something about you deserve it, and you have to go through a cleansing process of your economy really contracting, because then you know when it grows back again, it's really all yours.
Come on.
And
Of
that,
course,
no, I'm serious. I'm serious. I'm serious. This is a real, and this is, the Americans don't have such a, the Americans don't have such a conception. The Americans don't have such a conception, and that's why they look at how America came out of the post-2008 crisis. Yes,
But
they have a
I'm
much
sorry,
more.
if you're
they have a much more-
comparing America to Greece, I'm afraid you're not
not-
taking a
I'm
very
comparing it
good...
to Europe. No, I'm comparing it to Europe. I'm comparing it to Europe. I'm comparing it to Europe.
Hold on, one at a time.
I don't mind
Leonidas.
hearing that...
Leonidas, has Jakob Hessler gone native and become French?
No, I think France is going very well in the idea that only entrepreneurs can put a country back on its feet.
Precisely.
But yes, precisely. What is the big companies which are going to succeed to make Greece have an economy? There's tourism, there's a bit of boat ship, there's olive oil. And you've done it because most of the population is under the idea that economy, it is going and getting a retreat, getting a bit of money, because the whole country, the whole policy of left and wing for years has only been based on demagogy. They were elected the left and the wing, as you know.
Left and right wing, because they've done the
left
same.
and right wing did exactly the same, promising at each election that the retreats were going to be 1 or 2 years earlier, at that extent that at 53 years old, any teacher could take its its pension,
retirement,
which is the youngest in all of Europe, and they did bring, to win the elections, the whole country to absolute collapse. So there's a minimum of principle of reality which is going to have to come back. Somebody's going to have to do it. And I'm sorry, it isn't the case of the actual government. So sometime or another, it is not possible to bring money every 6 months again to say we're going to be able to go on like we were going on for years and years. Something's got to have to change in the country.
I completely agree with you, and I'm not an advocate, neither am I a friend of the current government. I'm not at all. I don't think that the economic policies that they advocate are the right answer. I do believe in the reform of the pension system. I do believe that they need to severely shrink part of the government control of some of the sectors. Oil industry is one, and that there is a real problem of not enough entrepreneurship, which is now being addressed. I know many entrepreneurs in Athens. Actually, there is an entrepreneur organization, and they actually are pushing very hard.
They are pushing.
And they're pushing very hard.
And they are the future of Greece.
Yes, but they, if you ask them, actually I will do that tonight, if you ask them whether they would want to be kicked out, they'd say that is the lifeline to the rest of the world that they have.
First of all, there's no issue of kicking anybody out. I mean,
Yes, there is.
no,
Yes, there is.
I don't
Yes,
believe
there
so.
is.
It doesn't mean because they would be outside of there would be a Grexit that we abandon Greeks. There can be help. There could be a managed exit of Greece. But the fact is that sometime or another, it can't be always the idea that state's going to pay, Europe's going to pay, Germany's going to pay.
No.
Sometime or another, the
for the
economy
moment,
is going to produce its own growth.
You weren't
And we
here
are
during
not
this
there
part of
yet.
the discussion. You weren't there during the first part of the discussion, but I highlighted the fact that for the moment nobody has paid anything. Okay, these are bookkeeping operations that actually no money has gotten out of European taxpayers' pockets. The economists all know this. I would just like to follow your discussion on the euro, a thought experiment. Were Germany to leave the euro, and all the other members of the Eurozone remain and return to the Deutschmark would explode in value because of its trade surpluses. The U.S. Treasury Department, the U.S. businesses, the U.S. Treasury Department has been bitterly complaining for years now about German trade surpluses and about Chinese trade surpluses. See, what this means is that what Jakob Hessler is saying is right, is that for Germany, the euro is an extremely important currency because it's devalued compared to what the Deutschmark would be were it outside of the euro.
All right, finally, let me just bring in Raul Ruparel here because we're almost out of time. Raul, a few years back, Britain, where you are, they were talking, Tony Blair wanted to have a referendum on joining the euro. Now it's a referendum on leaving the EU. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, there was never really much support in the UK for joining the euro, but I think this referendum is entirely different. There is generally at the moment
different from the conversation
support for
we're having about Greece?
Yes, well, I think that there are very different negotiations. I mean, Cameron is embarking on a negotiation with Europe, but there are different approaches. First of all, he hasn't laid out his red lines for the renegotiation before being elected, and he hasn't been elected on a mandate to change things necessarily. He's been elected on a mandate to go and ask and have a discussion and then have a referendum. So there is some slight differences, but there are lessons he has to learn from what Greece is doing. You don't necessarily go and lay out your red lines and ask everyone to meet them. It has to be about EU reform and EU-wide change, not just about the UK exceptionalism. But I think there is growing support for reform. It is a wider issue in the UK, and there is a desire to see something changed. And so I think Cameron is doing the right thing on that front. Whether or not he'll succeed in reforms, we'll see. But I think there is a growing agreement as well that something needs to happen at the European level to improve competitiveness, to improve the democratic accountability of the EU, and also to respect the view that there are some members who are never going to join the euro, who are going to be outside, and that you need to have a bit more of a flexible EU structure to incorporate those in the Eurozone and those outside. And I think that was accepted politically in the June 2014 conclusion. So, I think there are some optimistic hopes for his reform process. At the moment, I think the likely result is probably that he'll get a few reforms and the UK will vote to stay in, but we shouldn't be complacent about that, and we'll have to see how it goes. And I think negotiations in Greece at least show that it will be a tough negotiation over the next few months.
And we'll definitely continue to follow it. Raul Ruparel, many thanks for joining us from London. I want to thank as well Leonidas Kalogeropoulos for being with us, as well as Jakob Hessler and Philip Galb. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois.
There seems to be light at the end of the tunnel for the first time in a long while.
Indeed. And a lot of front pages on this nth meeting, I suppose, of the Eurogroup. Some on social media riffing on that Judgment Day again. with Varoufakis in the form of Arnold Schwarzenegger. You also have this graphic that has been doing the rounds of social media as well, which shows, I suppose, the extent to which we've been hearing this is your last chance, this is your last chance, this is your last chance, this is your last chance since 2011. So certainly a dramatic aspect to all of that, which has been picked up as a metaphor indeed by some journalists. Larry Elliott saying at Tsipras of Athens, a gripping drama entering its final act. And he says, like all dramas, or like all the best plays, there is more than one possible ending. He talks about the two main actors, Alexei Tsipras, being conflicted characters. Tsipras thinks an end to austerity is needed if Greece is to stay, is to start climbing out of the deep economic hole in which it's been. But he knows that a majority of Greeks want Greece to stay within the Eurozone, so he's conflicted, which will involve swallowing fresh austerity measures. Also Angela Merkel, in the sense that the Greeks are fed up of writing checks, but she doesn't... The Germans rather, but indeed. But she doesn't want to oversee the disintegration of the Eurozone. So that sort of drama metaphor coming up again. My big fat Greek divorce, that's a fake front page of The Economist, starring the two characters again. You also have Greece. I suppose that one is a bit more predictable. And I think it was John Williams, indeed, who tweeted this earlier.
The Euro, the one that
Euro, the one that I don't want, and no longer hopelessly devoted to EU. So, I mean, it's not really a funny issue, I suppose, but people are trying to, I suppose, come up with creative ways of depicting the repetitive elements of it. And of course, then there's a lot of doomsday stuff as well. Greece is Europe's failed state in waiting. That's an article in the Financial Times. In Katamerini, we must save Greece for the sake of Europe. Facts such as a 35% increase in suicide rates since 2010. So this is, there's a funny side of it, but there's also a very austere side of it, for want of a better word.
All right, many thanks, James Creighton. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.